Welcome to Oklahoma Gardening. Now that it's spring, many of you have had time to go visit the public azalea gardens and look at the beautiful landscaping. And you may have thought to yourself about turning part of your grounds into a miniature azalea garden. Well, today we're going to visit someone who's actually done that. We're going to visit Leonard Miller up in Grove, Oklahoma, and he's turned a large portion of his yard into a really beautiful azalea garden. Let's go visit Leonard. This first section of garden that we're going to look at may not look like much now. It's only been in the ground for just one growing season. Leonard, I want to thank you for letting us come and visit today and show off your place. I guess the first thing people want to ask, azaleas and rhododendrons have a reputation for being extremely fussy growers. What do you need to do to get them to grow well for you?
Well, first I think we ought to examine the plant, and particularly the root system. We have one here that's, as you can see, is easily dug.
How long has this been in the garden?
This has been in the yard 1 year. And you can see the fibrous root system that holds the medium together is small, hairy-like furry roots, and it does not have a taproot. And so the plant does not grow very deep into the soil. And that is the one thing that causes some of the problems with raising azaleas is the fact that they have to be watered fairly regularly.
Because they have such a shallow root system, if they dry out, you can basically damage a lot of the root system and kill the plant.
Yes, particularly the problem with azaleas can be that the peat moss dries out underneath the plant and you are not aware of it. And the plant gets less prosperous every year. And so here I have planted them in pine bark, and you can see that they're doing quite well. And pine bark, the water drains right through there and will not dry out like peat moss.
Now, is this just straight pine bark that's growing in?
Yes,
nothing
it is.
Else?
Nothing else. Requires a little bit more watering to do this, so you have to watch your watering schedule. But it does have some advantages because it won't dry out. Now, if you find that your plant doesn't seem to improve with watering, it may be that it's dried out underneath here, and you can just dig it up quite quickly and check the roots, and then if it is dry, put it in a tub of water, and it'll recover, and then just set it right back into the ground.
So I guess it's like most other plants, you want to make sure that you're not watering just the surface, you're watering the entire depth of the root zone. Make sure it gets its water.
Peat moss has got a problem with drying, and once it becomes dry, it's hard to get wet again.
What else is that? Is the pine bark the only really good material for growing azaleas?
Well, I like to use a mixture of peat moss and pine bark and some soil to give it the minerals that it's necessary for establishing plant growth.
Okay. Let's look at the rest of the garden. Now, when you look around, you've got this area very nicely landscaped. You've got pathways all the way through it. Did it always look like this? Did you just come in and plant the plants?
No, Jim, we wanted to establish rapid drainage for our plants, and so we have established mounds of dirt with pine bark that covers them to prevent weed formations, and also to add the acidity necessary to grow rhododendrons and azaleas.
And these rocks you also brought in. So this was a more or less flat piece of ground until
That's right. It was just a woodland area with fairly young deciduous trees, about 40 years old here. The trees are about 40 years old.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of the rooting media. I imagine you've gone to so much trouble to put in the pine bark. We've talked about mixtures of pine bark and peat moss. I take it azaleas won't do very well if they're just planted in normal soil.
That's true, Jim. That those little tiny roots won't penetrate the clay, and so that's why we have to have an acid medium with lots of humus.
Okay. We've got the rooting, or the growing media, acid media, well drained, a lot of moisture. Any other requirements?
Yes, drainage is very important. If you have a low-lying area that water stands because of clay, generally the plant will die, especially if the water stands more than 4 to 6 hours. So what we've done here is we've planted our plants up on a mound that allows a very quick drainage.
You've got this section planted under a lot of oak trees. Do they need shade?
Yes, they need some protection. Azalea will grow in full sun, but we often have more problems with them. They dry out quicker. They generally start growing too soon in the growing season, and thus they're susceptible to late freezes, as we've had this year. And so some protection, like the east or north side of your house, would be an excellent place if it drains well there.
Now we've talked about azaleas. Are rhododendrons any different in their cultural requirements?
As far as the root growth, that's about the same. They like acid soil, rapid drainage, and pine bark, particularly because of a fungus that it inhibits. But the biggest probably important thing is site selection for rhododendrons. They require, because they have large tropical looking leaves.
The evergreen leaves.
Yes, the large leaves, they cannot take the wind like an azalea can.
They dry out.
They dry out, and they'll wind burn. They defoliate from desiccation. So on the north side of the house, or some place where you have deep shade, is an excellent place for a rhododendron.
So rhododendrons, even more than azaleas, same soil requirements, but they definitely need that shade, and they definitely need wind protection.
That's right.
Now I imagine on these smaller plants, especially this first year, the first winter that they've gone through, they're going to need a little bit of tender loving care to get them through it. Are there any particular hints on that?
Yes, we have an area where we're protecting a small rhododendron. Would you like to go over and see it?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Jim, let me show you what I've done to protect this small plant for winter. These are pine branches that I have cut out of some of my pine trees.
What are they for? I mean, it looks rather odd. There must be purpose to them.
Yes, during Oklahoma's winters, we have a lot of strong winter sun. And these plants are mountain plants that usually are covered either with snow or on the north side of a huge mountain. So we have to protect our plants from the winter sun and also from our winter winds.
Why do you need to protect them? I mean, they still have green leaves in there. Shouldn't the sun be doing it some good?
Well, the nature of the plant is that it releases moisture very fast, and particularly from strong light like our winter sun. So what I've done is covered over this area with some shade through our pines, and also I've opened up the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket here.
Oh, it's just a planting container.
Yes, and just set it over there to protect it from the winter winds.
So actually what you're trying to do is protect it from water loss.
That's right, during the winter time. Even though Oklahoma can have nice winter rains, it still often will freeze the ground in the winter time here and allows the plant to not have water available for its leaves.
So it may still be losing water through the leaves, but since the ground's frozen, it can't get water to replace that.
Yes, in fact, even with all the protection that I've given it, we see a little bit of the leaf burn right at the edge.
Okay. So do you need to do that every year, or is it just mostly for the smaller plants?
No, usually for the younger plants, but over here I have constructed some of my larger plants a ring of wire that's covered with burlap, and I have a plant that I'm protecting there. and this would accommodate a larger plant.
Okay, we've got a small one in there, but there is plenty of room in there.
Right, and this is something easily fabricated with things that you can buy right there in your small towns.
Now this
we
would
live here.
Around the edge, I can see that would protect from the wind. Do you need anything more over the top to protect from the sun coming down?
Yes, as you can see, I have a little extra, and when I want them, I can pull this edge up and pin it together to protect
a little
it
tarp
from,
over the top.
yeah, from the shade. I could also, if I had an extra piece, just lay over the top, and that'll protect it for the first several years during our harsh winters.
Now, I suppose it would also be important, since what you're trying to do is protect it from excessive water loss. Imagine there's a lot that you need to do, make sure the ground is moist so that it can fend for itself. There's at least water down there for it to get in the winter.
Whenever you are going to plant a plant that requires quite a bit of moisture, whether it be a new tree or an azalea, rhododendron, or whatever, you need to plan ahead for your watering. And overhead watering seems to be a better solution rather than drip irrigation for azaleas and rhododendrons. It cools the leaves and cools the root zone, and the evaporation of the soil, of the water, will tend to cool the whole area. And since these are mountain plants that we're growing in the plains,
they're really not adapted for this area. You kind of have to
right,
pamper them a
that's
little bit.
right. We have overhead watering. If you're watering your lawn with a sprinkling system or any type of aerating type of water system, you could have rhododendrons, azaleas along the woodland edge, and that system would work for your azaleas
also. It would
also.
give you the watering and the cooling while you're doing the lawn.
That's right.
Get double purpose. I noticed you've got, in your larger garden, you've got it set up with the risers and overhead sprinklers scattered throughout, kind of a permanent system.
Yeah, Jim, these are large growing plants, some getting as tall as 12 feet. And so we have 8-foot risers here to water the plants as they grow. So we're planning ahead, hoping that we get a nice growth.
Now, you've got this section planted under the shade of a lot of large trees, basically in the woods. Now, a lot of our viewers don't have woods in their backyard. I noticed you've got over in the corner some rhododendrons protected by a rather neat structure. Can we go over and look at that briefly?
Sure, that'll be great.
Now, very few of us have oak forests in our backyard like you do, but I like this structure. This gives you your shade without having to have your trees around it.
Yes, this is for an example of an ideal plant location for a person that doesn't have pine trees or large deciduous trees. What we have is a fence in our backyard that has an extra little structure that we've built out here about 6 feet from the side. Now what we have is north exposure, and so that the plants are protected from the wind and from the strong sun in the wintertime.
Okay. Now I imagine this isn't going to work on if you have a western exposure of your fence.
Right.
I guess back here, that's where it starts facing west, and you can't come out that far with a roof to give you your shade. So what did you do there?
Well, as your yard and your fence changes around, you have to change plants also. We have a west exposure here, and so we've planted, keeping with the acid soil, we have planted deciduous azaleas, which like a lot more light. We have raised beds here, and there's one feature of an azalea or rhododendron is the roots like lots of air. And so that's why the roots do not penetrate deep into the soil.
So you need to give it plenty of water, but the water needs to drain away, and these raised beds help you do that.
That's right. As we go further on in this yard, we have a pine tree. And so underneath the pine tree, even though we have west exposure here, we can grow large relief rhododendrons again.
So it's giving you the shade from the western sun, so you don't need your the overhead structure.
Right, that gives it the protection we need. And it also provides us with that shade during the winter time that is harmful to our plants if we get too much sun. So a pine tree is an excellent place on the north side of your pine trees to grow azaleas and rhododendrons. You have to be careful though with pine trees. They can absorb most all the air moisture, so you want to plant them back just a little ways from them so they don't control all the
They can block the rainfall coming so the soil stays dry.
It's amazing how much you can stand under a pine tree and not get wet in this nice light rain.
Well, we've looked at your new planting and a little bit of your older planting. You've got a really nice garden out front. Can we go look at that?
Sure, let's go look.
Well, I can see out here in the front yard, Leonard, you've done the same thing that you did in back to protect these rhododendrons. They sure look healthy. Now, what variety are these?
Well, this particular one is Janet Blair, and this is Spring Dawn. And the variety that we saw in the backyard was Scintillation. It's one of the best that for here in Oklahoma.
Okay, well, when we talk about growing rhododendrons, they're beautiful plants. You take the time to prepare the soil properly and protect them from the harsh sun and the wind. When you talk about variety selection, what are their limitations for growing here temperature-wise?
Well, Oklahoma has a varied weather pattern, and if it gets 15 below in your yard, you might want to plant a rhododendron because they will take 25 below some varieties. If it gets about 10 degrees in your yard, you want to select only the hardiest azalea and rhododendrons to go in your yard.
Okay.
At 5 below zero, you can grow most of the plants of azaleas. Gets between 5 and 10 degrees here, and we've been able to grow azaleas and rhododendrons quite nicely. Then if you're lucky enough to have maybe 0 or a +5 in your yard, you can grow almost any kind of azalea that they sell here in Oklahoma.
Okay, good. Well, I know we talked earlier today when we were preparing to tape the show about how every yard is sort of its own little environment. And if you live in Oklahoma City or Tulsa, if you live right in town, it usually stays much warmer there in the wintertime than it does in the outlying areas. For example, in Tulsa, a week or two ago, we had a freeze. In town, it only got down to 34, yet in the outlying areas, down to 27. And your own yard could also be affected that way, just in different pockets of it. So it's a good idea to get to know not only the hardiness zones where you live in Oklahoma, but also what the minimum temperatures are going to be where you are. Now, we're in Grove, Oklahoma. That's in far northeast Oklahoma. If you live down near Idabel, you have a lot more options so far as growing these.
That's right. But I'm not going to move. I like this area.
Oh, it's beautiful right here on Grand Lake. Yeah. Well, now up here you have some azaleas that really have beautiful color. What variety is this over here?
This is Sherwood Orchid, and it's a early blooming azalea. It has a violet color. Not many people like it, but I do.
Oh, it's just intense, especially on a cloudy day. Now, on azaleas and rhododendrons, when the blossoms start to fade, are there any special cultural techniques you need to use to encourage good bloom the next year?
Yes, there's a couple of things that we want to consider. One of them, we want to select an azalea that drops the blossom off after it flowers, so that there's not a spent or dead bloom there. Oh. Now in rhododendrons, after they flower and they form a seed pod, then you'd like to go back, and it's called deadheading, take that off so that you'll have more vigorous growth and a better bloom for next year.
And make sure you do that immediately after bloom.
Now in some azaleas, such as Hino de Gary, we have a heavy seed production after the bloom. And so if you have a few plants and you're growing Hino de Gary or other varieties that may form the seed pod at the top, take that off too. It's a little impossible for me here.
Oh, sure. You'd be all day taking old blossoms off. But, well, these are really pretty. Now, what are some of the other varieties of azaleas? I know we usually advise people if they're planting them to sort of match it with the brick on your house. They usually say don't pick out a hot pink one to go against red
Right.
brick.
Some people have different tastes in color, and so when you go to the nursery, you might want to wait until they're in bloom so you can find the color that you really like. Here we have a beautiful coral pink, and we'd want to keep that away from the purple because it would probably clash a little bit, and particularly the reds and the purples don't do so well. So if we were in the landscape and we still wanted to use purple, we would put some white in between there and kind of separate that.
Sure.
And also white is a little stronger color, and so I like it, and like I say, color is a personal preference.
Well, it would cool down the hot pinks and purples
That's
too
right.
a little bit.
Let me show you some cold damage we had here in Grove last week. So we might talk a little bit about how to prevent cold damage and what to do if you do have expected frost. With a large plant like this that's 6 feet tall, it's kind of difficult to control the weather. But one of the first things you want to do is to find a protected area, particularly on a north slope or the north side or the east side of your house, where the soil doesn't warm up so fast.
Okay, so they won't come out of dormancy too soon.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then if you do have a south slope like this, then you might want to select a later blooming azalea so that the bud is nice and tight before the cold weather comes along.
It'll be more hardy then.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Well,
cold damage can be prevented by the site location often.
Okay. What did you do to, that was such a deep freeze that we had a week and a half ago. What did you do to protect these?
Well, it got 24 degrees here on about the 8th of April, which is almost a record cold for that temperature for that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there wasn't much I could do because my plants had already started growing. But we have fear of damage the stem of the plant and split the bark.
Mm-hmm.
So to prevent that and the total loss of my plants, I covered these plants with 7,000 square feet of visqueen.
You were busy then to cover this whole place?
Right,
Wow.
we tried.
So-
We have about 1,000 plants, and we covered about half of them.
My goodness. Well, at least that saved the plant. These blooms obviously that were exposed or in direct contact with the plastic were damaged, but I can see down below you saved a few.
Yes, and some varieties that were late blooming will be coming out next week.
And they'll be fine.
Yeah, they're going to be real pretty.
Right. Well, I see down in there we have some beautiful red and white ones. Let's go take a look at those.
Okay.
Well, Leonard, we've been looking at azaleas and rhododendrons that we consider broadleaf evergreens, but you mentioned you have some deciduous ones as well. You might want to talk about a little bit.
Yes, this is American native called Ostrinum, and it's lacks the leaves. In the nursery, you probably wouldn't even recognize it as a live plant, but it actually is a beautiful flowering American plant azalea that offers the color of yellow in the garden.
Oh.
And this will open up and produce a nice floret of probably 40 or 50 flowers, real small flowers in a nice yellow truss. Mm-hmm. That will offer some different color and accent to the garden, where pink, purple, and red and white are the most common of the evergreens.
Mm-hmm. So if you want a yellow, you might try one of the Ostrinum.
Yes, and
type.
there's a number of hybrids that are available. The Exoberries and the Knapp Hills that offer the color of yellow, and also they come in other colors, red and white and pink.
Oh, be a nice change in the garden if you didn't want all of the other types. Well, now we've talked a lot about watering them and soil preparation. I get lots of questions in the Extension office about fertilizing azaleas. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, an azalea doesn't need a whole lot of fertilizer.
Okay.
So when we fertilize, we use caution. They're sensitive to fertilizer, and so we have to be careful or we can kill the plant. So we're trying to help them, but we kill it. So what I recommend is a commercial fertilizer designed to just feed the azalea or rhododendron.
Okay.
If you have a large number of plants like I do, I can't afford to do that, so I go down to the co-op and buy cotton seed meal and give each one of my plants usually a cup of cotton seed meal. I do that in the early spring, and it breaks down, and it's an organic fertilizer that breaks down very slowly and doesn't damage the roots.
So it doesn't burn, but it gives a slow release of nitrogen.
Yes,
plant.
and also I mulch my plants with oak leaves in the fall, and this will break down and add nutrients to the soil as well, particularly keeping the soil acid.
Okay, well, I know that's important. Well, we've covered a lot of points today on growing azaleas and rhododendrons. If you want to try them, remember those main points. Watch where your sun's coming from. Watch for drying winds. Pay attention to your soils. Go easy on the fertilizer, and by all means, don't forget to water them. Well, Leonard, thank you so much for sharing your garden with all of us. We've enjoyed looking through it, and hopefully you all will want to try some azaleas or rhododendrons in your own garden.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.